And Ed Kanze joins us this week. It's good to see you again. Welcome.
Well, it's a pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
You and your producer, Josh Clement, are back with a new season of Curiously Adirondack that folks can find online on your website. And several of the segments will be airing this summer and fall here on Mountain Lake PBS. You guys love telling stories about the Adirondacks.
We do. We love the Adirondacks, and the Adirondack region is full of characters, so we find them and talk to them, and we also get out and do a little exploring, too.
Now, you've written books. You write your magazine articles, Adirondack Explorer and Adirondack Life, and podcasts and lectures. But the videos, this started a few years ago. You teamed up with Josh Clement and decided to produce these fun and informative videos that folks can find online. And you really, through the past few years, have found, as you mentioned, interesting characters and fascinating tidbits about the Adirondacks that a lot of people may not know about, and fun things about the Adirondacks too.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great fun. It's a treat to work with Josh, treat to work with you guys at Mountain Lake PBS. And yeah, the whole thing got started with a grant from National PBS, was available, trying to get the stations to the affiliates to produce more content for the web. And I will admit I was a skeptic in the beginning. I had this sort of private dream. I wanted to be the next David Attenborough. I wanted to do big, long,
yes,
thorough documentaries. And then along came this grant opportunity to try to get some money and to try to make these sort of mini documentaries that these videos are, sort of 5 to 10 minutes, and jump into a subject and take a look around and have to jump back out fairly quickly. And I was skeptical in the beginning, but it really has been incredibly rich in experience. It's amazing how much, ground you can cover in 5 to 10 minutes. I handle most of the sort of the storytelling and writing end of it, although Josh has a hand in everything. He has all sorts of technical abilities I don't have, and just a really creative mindset. So we work well together.
And season 4 is this now?
Season 4.
So tell us some of the stories you have coming up for season 4, or some of the places you're going to take us, some of the interesting folks we're going to meet.
Well, we did a two-parter that's called The First Adirondackers, and one of the great and most fascinating of all Adirondack subjects has hardly been touched upon in literature and elsewhere, and that's the American Indian presence in the Adirondack Mountains. It was the conventional wisdom for a long time was that the Indians hardly lived in the Adirondacks. They maybe darted in and out to do a little hunting, but there weren't American Indians in the Adirondack region because it was too cold and too rocky and not very good for farming. I always was skeptical about that theory because Indians lived in significant numbers to the north of us in Canada in areas that are colder and rockier. I think part of the issue was that archaeologists who go through grad school and look for places to make their name in archaeology, they tend to want to trot off to Egypt or Cambodia or the Ohio or Mississippi River valleys or Central America and look for the big stuff. Indians were a little thinner on the ground here, and so anyhow, not a whole lot was being done. But two people who are central to this two-part video that we made are really sort of pushing the ball forward. And Kurt Steger at Paul Smith College, who's a biologist, a paleoecologist who studies past climates, and he's gotten very interested in this whole subject. And then Tim Messner at SUNY Potsdam, and Tim's an archaeologist. And so he's doing digs with students actively in the Adirondacks every other summer, and they're discovering amazing, fascinating stuff.
And not to give the story away, but they're finding things that are dated, that look like they're 12 to 13,000 years old potentially. So there's that evidence, and Kurt Steger, we know, is certainly a well-respected researcher, especially when it comes to climate change in the Adirondacks. And through core samples, he can take core samples from ponds and lakes, and you have some in the story. You show him doing that, and really they can go back and they can find what they believe will be evidence that Native Americans were here about the end of the last ice age.
Yeah, it's amazing. Kurt points out that Indians were here before the forest. The human presence in the Adirondacks is older than the forest itself, so it's really exciting stuff. Tim Messner has done a dig on Tupper Lake, a site that contains quite a bit of pottery, all sorts of stone points. It suggests not just hunting parties, but men and women being there. The site occupied over maybe 1,000 years or more, and the dates we're looking at for that site, I think, are around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. So, you know, it turns out it's a big story, and it's just beginning to be told. And I often find myself sort of boasting a little bit that my ancestors and my mother's side have been kicking around the Adirondack Mountains since the 1790s. Well, we spent time with John Fadden, who looms large, especially in Part 2. He's a Mohawk, and his family has been here maybe for 12 to 13,000 years. So that beats mine.
He's got a few years.
Yeah, that beats mine by a few generations.
And John runs the Six Nations Indian Museum in Onchayota, New York, which is a fascinating place to go and visit. You also take us on some trips, which we love. We love to go out exploring in the Adirondacks, and you take us to OK Slip Falls, which people probably have heard of, but for folks up this way, maybe they haven't gotten to it because it's down in Hamilton County, out near Indian Lake. And and again, not to give the story away, but that potentially may be the largest waterfalls in the Adirondacks.
Yeah, it's one of the highest ones. I've struggled with trying to nail down which one really is the highest, and I'm not sure that it is OK Slip Falls. But if it's not, it's close. It's a very high waterfall on a stream that drains into the Hudson, not far from the falls. And it was the land was privately owned, I think, by a timber paper company for a long, long time. So the falls was known, but you couldn't get there, at least legally, unless you had an in with the company. But the state acquired the land some years ago, and now you can hike in there. I think it's about a 6-mile round trip. So we went in early one morning with the camera, and we're always trying to try new things, and one thing we tried doing on that one is Josh mic'd me, and I did some of the commentary for that one, not from a script. I just winged it on the way in, and it was very challenging, sort of what you do, Tom. I came away from that day with a lot of respect for what you do, but it was fun and rewarding, and of course Josh edited it so I looked better than I actually was.
And the fascinating thing about that is many people think, well, to get to such a large waterfall, you're probably going up. You're scaling one of the high peaks to get up, but the interesting thing about this story is that actually you're heading down to get to this landmark.
Yeah, it's one of the things that appealed to me about that story, and in another one that we did a while back on Avalanche Pass, is that in the Adirondacks, the emphasis among so many people, it's actually becoming a problem these days with crowds, is that everybody wants to climb the peaks. And if you have peaks, you have valleys between the peaks, and as a naturalist, to me, a lot of the most interesting terrain in the Adirondacks is valley country. It's where the moose are, and where there's more species of things. Really interesting stuff on top of the peaks too, but the valleys are neglected, I think, sometimes in our Adirondack storytelling. So OK Slip Falls appealed to me because, yeah, we didn't go high, we went low, and it's a beautiful, exquisitely beautiful place.
It is. When folks see it, they will be amazed. And not to give it away, you also get into how it was named, and we won't. We won't give away that secret, but your story does cover that because it is an unusual.
It's an odd name.
An odd name, and you give us the story of how that name came to be. So we'll look forward to seeing that coming up in the next few weeks here on Mountain Lake PBS. You've written several books about your journeys as an Adirondack naturalist. You've also written about John Burroughs, who was the writer and the naturalist part of the conservation movement back in the late 1800s. A novel about Henry Hudson, but you've also written about your family's history in the Adirondacks and your history in the Adirondacks. And really, as you mentioned just a few moments ago, your family dates back to the late 1700s.
Yeah, my last book title is Adirondack, Life and Wildlife in the Wild, Wild East.
I love that title, yeah.
And the publisher, SUNY Press, labeled it a memoir. I get teased for that. Some people think I'm not old enough to write a memoir. Others think I passed that threshold a while back. But anyhow, yeah, it's sort of my life story. I have a lot of Adirondack blood in my veins and always wanted to live here, but yet I didn't grow up here because my mother had moved away. So it's been sort of a life stream for me to end up living in a little town in the Adirondacks, sort of like the one that my grandfather lived in, and having a very rich life here.
And as you mentioned, you worked as a national park ranger up in Acadia National Park up in Maine, down in Florida,
down in the Deep South.
Was it the Gulf Islands National
Yes.
Seashore? And you are now here in the Adirondacks, and you're an Adirondack guide. So you spend a lot of time still out now with people, giving tours and sharing your love of the Adirondacks with everyone.
I do, yeah. I'm out in the wilds all the time, especially in the summertime. It's pretty much full time, and it's great to be out there. It's a place I love.
Excellent. Well, we love your stories. Curiously Adirondack coming back for a new season, and we'll be happy to air them here on Mountain Lake PBS. Ed Kanze, thanks a lot for taking the time to stop by and see us today.
Thank you, Tom. A treat.